face this way. Anyone would like to come closer, you're welcome to. It's hard to imagine a woman more elegant and gracious than Susan Quastel. One of the remarkable things about being a rabbi is the opportunity to get to know people at all stages of life and have them often share with me about their own life story. And in visiting the Weinberg and the Breyer for the past dozen or so years, it was always Susan's smiling face that brought me so much joy. I think perhaps it was because she told the best stories. She had so much to say, but also it was just the way that she carried herself as such a graceful and special person. I used to think of her as the queen of the Weinberg, the way she kind of regally held herself. But I think about the ways in which Susan spoke about her life, her long life of 101 years that was filled with so many different chapters, some very, very difficult ones, of course, but with a joie de vivre, a real understanding of the beauty and the blessing of being alive in the world. So today we are here with, of course, much sadness at this loss of such a woman in our lives, a friend, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. But also we come in real gratitude to have had her in our lives, to have known what she brought to the world in the fullness of her years. For that we give thanks. We're going to listen to some of the words of our tradition, as well as a poem that Barb shared with me that I think is really beautiful in thinking about the life of an individual and the blessing of such life. It's by Joseph Leftwich. Death is not strange. Strange is life that flesh can think and body believe, that dust can sing, that a clod of earth for one's lifetime can house God, that dead things live when touched by God's breath is a miracle, not death. Listen to the words of the Psalms to give us comfort, just as in every generation of our people, they have held on to these beautiful metaphors. I'll begin with Psalm 23. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bino desheyar vitzeni, amen menuchot, ema yenach aleni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God leads me in the paths of righteousness for the sake of God's name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti bebeit Adonai le'olech yamim. Lift my eyes up to the mountains. From where does my help come? Help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. So to learn about Susan's life, as many of us have done through the years, is truly a gift. And on behalf of really all of the family, Jonathan and Naomi, two of her grandchildren, are going to share the words that have been compiled by so many to help us understand and just learn more about exactly what an amazing person she was.
Dear family, friends, Rabbi Carrie Brown, and those joining us via live stream. We gather today to express our profound gratitude. Gratitude for the gift of knowing and loving our precious, beautiful, and wonderful grandmother, Susan Quastel. As you all know, Susan was entirely unique. She was courageous, independent, smart, witty, vivacious, loyal, courteous, kind, and wise. As her grandchildren, we'd like to share with you some of the remarkable life of this extraordinary woman. Susan was born in Amsterdam in 1923, originally named Sieni, after her mother's oldest sister. As a member of Amsterdam's vibrant Sephardi community, she enjoyed a happy childhood surrounded by her two sisters and a large extended family of aunts, uncles, and numerous cousins. Susan was affectionately nicknamed Suje, meaning little sister, since she was the second daughter, and this was shortened to Suze. Her teenage years, particularly during World War II, were marked by trials and tragedies that shaped her into the resilient woman we know. When the war broke out, Susan was just 17. According to her niece Bertine, Minko, Susan and her sisters were far from average girls. They were lively, exuberant, and a bit eccentric. From an early age, Susan aspired to be an elegant lady, and even then she held herself this way, a trait that would define her throughout her life. In 1941, as the effects of Nazi occupation were increasingly felt by all Dutch citizens, and especially by Jews, Susan's parents made the prescient decision to arrange for her to enter a nurse training program. They believed that she would excel in this occupation and more importantly, that it might keep her safe from the Germans. This foresight did offer some protection, but eventually Susan and her younger sister were forced to go into hiding. During this time, Susan worked as a maid for the Baroness Quarles von Ufford, taking on the false name Sophie. Disguising herself with this new identity to blend into an aristocratic Christian household, she survived the Holocaust. But tragically, Susan lost her sister Sarah and beloved parents during this terrible time. Only her sister Stella survived alongside her. Susan's strength in the face of such inhuman adversity was truly remarkable. It's an example for us, and we honor it today. In 1945, after Holland was liberated, Susan's life took a new turn. Now 22, she was invited to stay with her Uncle Joseph and Aunt Rosetta Nabarro in London. The Nabarros treated her like their own daughter, providing her with a new family when she had lost almost everything. Susan completed her nurse training, and after a matron's course at Oxford, worked her way up to become a head nurse at Charing Cross Hospital, a major facility in London. She lived in a flat on Downside Crescent in Belsize Park, a fashionable neighborhood like it is today, fully embracing London social life. Years later, she would tell us of those days with a twinkle in her eye, of dinner parties, often involving her cooking mishaps, and of special nights at the theater. Susan also became involved with British Zionist groups. Eventually, her adventurous spirit called her to Jerusalem in 1970, where she worked as head nurse at the Hadassah Medical Center. Despite tumultuous times in her own life, as well as in Israel, she thrived in this role. Her leadership in nursing was a point of great pride for her, and she spoke often of this period as one of serious challenge, but great reward. This experience deepened her dedication to helping others, a quality she carried throughout her life, and that she brought to her the next stage of her life, to her life with us. In 1974, while in Israel, Susan met our grandfather, Harry Quastel, who was attending a Board of Governors meeting for the Hebrew University. Unsurprisingly, he was immediately smitten by her many charms. They married in Vancouver in 1975, and Susan moved here, giving up her independent life for love and a new home. Their relationship was unique, with each playing very specific roles. Susan became our grandfather's greatest admirer, closest friend, and loving caretaker. She adapted beautifully to her new country and culture, embracing both the Jewish community and the art scene here in Vancouver.
To us, her younger grandchildren, Susan was the only Quastel grandmother we ever knew, and we loved her without hesitation. For Aaron and Benny, because their paternal and maternal grandparents had died earlier, she was really the only grandmother for them at all. From the start, she insisted we all consider her our real grandmother, and we did, with her lovely accent, pretty clothes, glittering jewelry. She was actually more like a fairy godmother, maybe even secret royalty. She was gentle and glamorous, mixed with a hint of mystery. She traveled the world, she went to dinners, she rained love on us, spoiling us with treats and attention. When we walked over to see her on the weekends, literally the only place Barb could convince us to walk long distances to, Susan always had things for the kids to do. She had puzzles and coloring books, snacks from the Dutch grocer, including Gouda cheeses and cinnamon brown sugar cookies. Even today, we remember these little luxuries like Orangina, which she called orange squash, and lipstick marks on our cheeks from all her kisses, and special lunches made by Irene as we sat on the stools around her kitchen table, and she would bring us back wonderful gifts from her trips, Dutch chocolate letters in Hebrew, and clothing from Marks and Sparks, giving us a small glimpse of her life before us. For family dinners, we were called to the table by this musical gong on the kitchen wall, and if you were lucky, you got to be the one to play it. She made each of us feel like we were her most important grandchild. And it wasn't just us. All children adored her. My favorite place in Susan's house was her closet. As a little girl, it was infinite and magical. Clothing hung in plastic from a dry cleaner. Purses were on the top shelves, competing with hats and the hat boxes. All the scarves were perfectly folded in the drawers, and they were separated by this really fine paper. And then there was just racks and racks and racks on the walls, on the floor, and shoes were in all of them. On our frequent shopping adventures together, Susan would beam at the saleswoman. Yeah, I'll have them in blue and black and white, to my astonished delight. But her most beloved purchases were her best friends, her art. Layered upon layer of artwork on the walls, stacked on the floor, and worried our grandfather might disapprove of a new acquisition, hidden behind and under the couch. Her collection featured valuable works by famous artists, beautiful works by unknowns, and daring works you wouldn't expect to see in a grandmother's home. And she knew art. When Matt, my brother, was 8 or 9, Susan took him for an afternoon to Granville Island. She pulled him into a warehouse-sized studio space for sculptors and fearlessly introduced him to an older artist working there. Matthew, this is Mr. Bill Reed. Only much later did he realize that she'd introduced him to one of Canada's most important artists. All of her treasures had a story. You could point at any painting, any jewel, any bottle of perfume, or any photo, and she would tell you a tale. Some things she just picked up at a shook for nothing. Others she designed with famous jewelers. She cultivated relationships with brilliant local artists. And while she valued the things she had, she also gave them away as generous gifts, and always with a lesson or a story. And in this way, she nurtured in us an appreciation for the finer things in life: education, art, classical music, beauty. It wasn't out of any elitism, but a desire for us to appreciate what she did and what made life so precious. Matt shared another memory that exemplifies this. During a Christmas time in Vancouver, if Shulamit was driving he or Daniel somewhere, she would take time to slow down in front of this house or another and admire all the beautiful decorations. Of course, Susan wasn't entirely committed to her Jewish identity, so the lesson we learned was simple: to not be afraid of beauty and joy just because it didn't belong to us, that it came from somewhere else didn't make it any less delightful or any less important. Susan's soft-spoken poise and giving nature contrasted with our family's rougher and louder personality, teaching us grace and poise by example. She would never do anything to undermine our parents' authority. Whenever one of us, usually me, went and cried to my grandmother regarding various conflicts we were having, she was supportive, she was sympathetic, but always reinforced the importance of loyalty and propriety. Respect your parents, she would remind us, and always be polite. And refined manners were of paramount importance. She insisted that I, as the only girl, learn all the details, including and not limited to the precise and proper way to arrange my silverware at the end of the meal, so that my servants would know when to clear the dishes.
As respectful and well-mannered as she was also our intrepid friend. At 84, Susan traveled to Dan and Alana's wedding in Toronto. After a family brunch, Dan offered to drive her back to the hotel. Susan accepted the ride but refused to rest. She said she was in Toronto. She would see the city. Too exhausted from wedding festivities to join, Dan dropped Susan off at, where else, the art gallery. She hopped out of the car, popped a ball cap on her head, and headed in to explore. And she was always the nurse, willing to step in and take care of us. After his army service, Benny got sick with a parasite that he picked up in Nepal. When he arrived in Canada in poor health, Susan did not hesitate for a moment. She insisted he stay with her, brought him to her own doctor, and took it upon herself to nurse him until he was well. While others in the family would surely have helped, the speed and intensity of her loving care was typical of Susan. Susan extended this care to her community, actively participating in organizations such as the National Council of Jewish Women, Hadassah, and Jewish Family Services. She served as president of the Canadian Friends of the Hebrew University from 1995 to 2000, utilizing her remarkable ability to network and connect with people. She also contributed to research at the Vancouver Holocaust Society, working to ensure that the lessons of history and our own life would never be forgotten. And after our grandfather's passing in 1988, she established an annual visiting lectureship at the Hebrew University in honor of his memory and attended some of those in person. One memory that captures Susan's essence is from one of those visits to Jerusalem while I was studying at Hebrew University. She was staying at the King David Hotel in a ridiculously tiny room, but she loved it for the memories it evoked. She insisted one day that I join her for high tea and forcefully encouraged me to wear a suit and tie for the occasion, which I had to borrow and which was absurdly out of place in Israel. As we sat there in the restaurant, me in an ill-fitting suit, and she very much that elegant lady, her rosy cheeks puffed up with happiness and pride. It's an image I will always appreciate.
In her later years, Susan lived at the Weinberg residence and then at the Louis Breyer home. She remained a joyful and engaged member of these communities, participating in every activity and keeping up to date with events in the wider world. As time went on, she was able to pay less attention, but she remained interested. One day, 2 years ago, my mother Barb mentioned to my grandmother that Queen Elizabeth had died. "That's too bad," Susan replied. "How old was she?" "She was 96, my mom said. "Ha," Susan gloated. "I'm 100. For as long as she could, she cherished time spent with her 30 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, cementing her role as super grandma for the newest generation. As we give one last kiss to our grandmother, Susan, we are filled with gratitude for the time we had with her. We thank those who stayed close to her in the later years, especially my mother, who was dedicated to her and for which we are so grateful. Jonas and Dina, Shoshi, the team at the Louis Breyer, including Jenny and Melanie Samuels, a constant companion and friend. Their care, their loving companionship meant the world to her and to us. Susan Quastel was a wonderful woman, loved and admired by all who knew her. Let's keep her memory alive through our stories by embodying her values of kindness, of resilience, of grace, and of generosity. Though we miss her dearly, her spirit lives on in each of us. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for being our grandmother, our fairy godmother, our glorious gift giver, and our nurturing, adventurous, and constant friend. Thank you. May your memory be a blessing to us all.
Thank you so much, Jonathan and Naomi, and all of you for compiling such a touching, beautiful eulogy for Susan. There's an expression in Hebrew, in Yiddish as well, that one should live ad 120 to 120. And there's a play on those words that one should live ad 120, that they should live to 100 as if they were 20. I feel like Susan did that. She really lived so fully and with such vigor and beauty and all of those things that you shared. So thank you so much for that. We're going to continue now with the traditional El Malei Rachamim, the prayer in which we ask that Susan's neshama, her soul, dwell on in eternity with God. El male rachamim, shochen bonromim, amse menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina, במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע, מזהירים את נשמת שולמית בת אהרון ורבקה, שהלכה לעולמה, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן. Amalei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Shulamit bat Aharon Verivka, our beloved Susan Quastel, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. So as we come now to this time for the burial, it is our final act of chesed, of loving kindness, that we do for Susan and her corporeal body. And so we're going to invite first the family to begin by shoveling dirt onto the grave. We do it with an inverted shovel, reminding us that this is not how we usually use this tool, but an act of love, of course, that we provide for Susan. And then we'll invite everyone who is able and gathered to please help us with this mitzvah. Barb.
Just count the rubber back. So I just wanted to put my coat on. It's getting sore.
Any of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren want to come on the other side as well?
So when can I pick up?
I'll call you.
You put someplace.
It's that dirty. I'll give you a call. Do you want to do this Friday? You always come every Friday.
I know, I was thinking I'd like to come for volunteer. And bring the dog.
Friday,
Yeah, I mean the dog, they like the dog. I'm happy to come.
We love to sing.
And the guy, who plays the piano? Like, oh, Cantor. Is his hair fake?
Of course.
What?
Of course they do.
The hair is fake. I told someone that, and I told Susan that. She said, "No."
Susan always tried to see the best.
What?
She always tried to see the good in everything. Always never really said anything bad.
Oh no, she would not. No.
She always say,
Unless you really hated that person. Unless you really hated that person, but it was very
Susan was always.
Oh, you know, I heard she had gumbo people.
no, she always say, I'm a nurse.
Yes, yes. Oh, but she didn't like what I said.
I'm a nurse.
I'm a nurse. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that.
No,
She told my doctor she got angry at Monty, who had been her doctor. for
Others
a while.
are able and
She
willing to
wanted
help.
him to prescribe more sleeping pills, and he said he wouldn't.
Yeah.
And she said, "I'm a nurse. I know what I'm supposed to do."
I just like the doctor is a killer.
yeah, she said, I'm a head nurse. You know that, right? I was a head nurse at UGA. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know Susan, but
Thank you.
There's another development, not something development.
Those who have the shoveling co-op
Yeah.
I mean, one of the few that we actually really didn't like Daniel, remember?
Robbie, they do want some.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't been at all. So we're trying to work with it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, she's this creative urge that she's always had.
So friends, I'm going to invite everyone, if you're willing to come back together. We're going to now do the Kaddish. If you have the program, it's on the inside. Sorry. I promise.
Norman. Norman knows yours. He says it for me.
Okay.
Yeah, my back is just killing me all of a sudden.
Susan used to say, when I get where I don't know what it is. But she did like to know. Oh, I told her she liked to know.
So we'll have everyone come gather close again.
Sorry.
This is being filmed.
Before we recite the Kaddish, I want to share this poem that's on the inside of your program. When I die, if you need to weep, cry for someone walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around others and give them what you need from me. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands and souls touch souls. You can love me most by sharing your joys, multiplying your good deeds. You can love me most by letting me live in your eyes and not in your mind. And when you say Kaddish for me, remember what our Torah teaches. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. I'll turn the page and invite the mourners and those who choose to join in these words of Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma didra pirutei v'amlich malchutei, v'kayachon u'vyomechon u'kaye d'chol beit Yisrael, Bagala Bizman Kari Vimru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'alam Ulamei Almaya. Yitvarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha B'richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechemata Da'amiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya Chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Romav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru Amen. Amen. Yizichrona Livracha, may Susan's memory always be a blessing. So as we now prepare to leave the cemetery for the mourners to enter this period of Shiva, it's our tradition to actually make a pathway that they can walk through and feel the comfort of community. So I'll invite those who are not family, if you would, to come and stand on the road so that they can feel your embrace.
You met your You met your
Yeah.
Naomi's dance. Yeah.
It has a bit of social play at the moment.
Naomi?
Gotta go back and get my stuff. They gave me a 7-day Shiva calendar.
I'm just gonna put my bag down.
So that was Dina.
Yeah.
Well, it's the candle and the binder under. But there's more stuff there.
Oh, you have all your purses are here.
Hi.
Rob.
Yeah, I knew.
You have all your purses.
Yeah. This is not one.
You going home now?
Yeah, I think
As
so.
we discussed, okay.
We're in the middle of points. So Sam got up last night.
Susan would be laughing. Yeah. You want to make sure. You want to make sure.